December 1941, German submarines, U-boats, depart on a secret mission. They cross the Atlantic undetected and take up positions a few miles off the east coast. Their target is the United States.
It was quite risky because we didn't know what anti-submarine warfare had to be expected.
Horst von Schroeter is watch officer on U-123.
We closed the shore within, say, 2 or 3 nautical miles. We smelled the forest ashore and we saw the autos, the cars running on the shoreway.
The German plan is codenamed Paukenschlag, or drumbeat. It calls for an all-out surprise attack on American merchant ships. The attack begins January 13th, 1942.
January was just a slaughter.
January is just the beginning.
And this went on all the time. Bodies and wreckage and oil was constantly coming ashore down the coast as far as Florida.
We were really afraid of it. We were scared because it was an unseen weapon.
In 1942, at the height of Operation Drumbeat, the German U-boat seems almost unstoppable. In a remarkable reversal, the hunters become the hunted. Barely 2 years after Drumbeat, the U-boats are suffering staggering losses. By the end of the war, the Allies sink 3/4 of Germany's combat U-boats. To this day, some 68 are still unaccounted for. A mere 60 miles from New Jersey, this is one of the lost U-boats. But no one knows which one. For 6 years, the group of divers that discovered the wreck has been trying to learn which U-boat it is. The team leader is professional diver John Chatterton. John's partners are Richard Kohler, a businessman, and John Yerga, also a professional diver.
Yeah. Well, just like, you know what this is? Just like these. Yes, it's got commands from the commander to the engineer, or from the engineer to the commander.
After an attack where they've been heavily depth charged, this would be replacement parts for that. There you go, Patrick.
Every summer, these divers come here and search for artifacts, hoping one will identify the wreck.
The first day I dove on this wreck, I said, what is this thing doing here? How did it get here? What is it? And we're 6 years later, we're still trying to answer those questions.
The questions are simple, but finding answers means overcoming enormous obstacles. Every trip to the wreck takes 8 hours. Divers leave at midnight to arrive by dawn. They average a half a dozen trips every summer. But this far offshore, the weather is unpredictable. More than half the time, rough seas at the wreck site mean they cannot dive. Even in good weather, the diving is difficult and dangerous. The wreck is 230 feet down in cold, murky water.
The national safe diving maximum limit is supposed to be 130 feet. This is another 100 feet deeper. If anything goes wrong, you've got to fix it right then and there.
Their bodies can only tolerate 2 dives a day and no more than 30 minutes on the bottom. At this depth, any mistake can be fatal. But for these divers, the quest has become an obsession. No matter what it takes, they are determined to identify this U-boat. This wreck will not give up its secrets easily. After a half-century underwater, it now scarcely resembles a U-boat. But some of its original features, like this gun mount, can still be discerned. The port side rudder, one of 2 which steered the boat. A massive propeller, halfway buried in sand. The stove, where the lone cook prepared meals for 57 men. The officers' quarters. A rubber-soled shoe, worn to minimize noise and escape detection. Valves for the diesel air intakes. Gauges for the diesel engines. One of the torpedo tubes, probably still loaded. A torpedo. Germany built more than 1,100 of these stealthy machines during the war. On the mystery wreck, the nature of the damage holds clues as to how the boat met its end. It must have been cataclysmic. The top of the pressure hull reveals an enormous crack, a giant split in the 1-inch steel. This boat must have suffered a massive explosion. The damage is centered in the control room. The conning tower is blown completely off the wreck. Whatever caused the explosion, with its pressure hull split wide open, the boat sinks like a stone, taking its crew to a death that cannot come fast enough. There are hundreds of U-boat wrecks lying on the ocean floor. 5 were sunk off the American coast, their positions recorded by the U.S. Navy. The Navy's World War II records, still on file in Washington, list some 10,000 attacks on U-boats, but none at the location of the New Jersey wreck.
Had a pretty good handle on where the U-boat wrecks were, but not in the position that John Chatterton gave me.
Nor do German records mention any U-boat lost here. The identity of this boat will have to be found in the wreck itself. The divers begin making regular trips to the U-boat. They start searching randomly for any object that might contain information.
The
was like a flurry of activity. We figured we'd have this thing identified in no time. But events 6 years hence have proved us wrong.
By the end of their first season, the divers have learned little.
Take up bowling.
Yeah, bowling. Bowling would be good.
Golf.
That doesn't exclude the 857 or the 879.
Over the winter, they gather information to better focus their search.
We pored over historic photographs of U-boats, propaganda films. The other thing we did was we spoke to veterans and people who were knowledgeable in U-boat life. And we said, well, what could we bring up from the wreck site that would give us positive identification on this wreck?
A U-boat veteran suggests looking for an escape lung, an emergency breathing device used to leave a sunken submarine. U-boat sailors often wrote their names on their escape lungs, and a name might help identify the wreck. In dive after dive, they sift through the debris and locate several escape lungs.
Just trying to see if the mouthpiece is in here, guys. I don't see any writing, do you?
Yeah, you know what? Whatever they wrote it on doesn't seem to have lasted.
We recovered several of them, none of which had any identifying marks on them.
I don't know.
Keep that plate, keep that plate.
The escape lungs proved disappointing. By now, the divers have been through most of the wreck without result. But there are two crucial areas they have yet to search.
We've been everywhere inside the wreck with the exception of the diesel motor room and the E-motor room. And unfortunately, we just haven't been successful. You know,
The electric motor room may hold the key. The divers have learned that boxes of spare parts stored here were often marked with tags bearing the U-boat's number. But reaching the electric motor room means passing through the diesel room. And the divers learned early on that the diesel motor room is perhaps the most dangerous place in the wreck.
I got my body halfway in the opening. I saw the cables hanging and all the debris just jutting out at angles. Kind of lost my nerve. It spooked me. You've got exhaust manifolds, pipe, plumbing, flanges, cables galore. All these objects just trying to grab you, it seems at times. And not only that, because the diesel motor room has all this huge equipment, you could bump into it, and that's when it chooses to break free on top of you.
One over ground that we've already looked at. Right. We're rehashing it.
You didn't come out with anything, did you?
No. Everywhere else we've been to at least once.
Having exhausted all other possibilities, the divers feel they have no choice. They will attempt the dangerous passage into the E-motor room.
So we got to go where we haven't been.
The plan is to enter the hatch, pass between the diesel motors, and continue into the electric motor room. The attempt begins. They pass through the hatch as planned. But as they approach the diesels, they discover their path is blocked. A large oil tank, normally bolted to the ceiling, has fallen. The space below the tank is too shallow to permit a diver to pass. Above, the gap between the tank and the pressure hull is also too small. Unable to continue past the tank, they abort the dive. A significant area of the wreck cannot be searched. It is a major setback. But the dive is not a total loss. On his way out of the diesel motor room, John Chatterton notices a sheet of metal that seems to have writing on it. This sheet of aluminum is marked with a schematic diagram, but it's the small print in the lower corners that interests the divers.
9C, Deschemeg, Bremen. That told us that this U-boat is definitely a Type 9C-40 German U-boat built at the Deschemeg plant in Bremen, Germany.
We know that it's a Deschemeg Bremen boat. That's our limiting factor.
From there, we were able to say, okay, there's only like 25 boats of this type that were built at that plant.
At last, the divers have a clue that narrows the field. For this wreck to be a Type 9 is not surprising. The Type 9 was a long-range boat used to patrol distant waters off Africa or America. It is designed in the 1930s as Germany starts to rearm. After World War I, the Germans are banned from having any submarines. But in 1935, the British allowed Germany to once again build U-boats. The British are confident they have nothing to fear because they now have ASDIC, or sonar, to locate submerged submarines. But Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's new U-boat force, thinks ASDIC is overrated. It only works underwater, so he will use his U-boats in a way the British are not expecting.
Dönitz wanted to use the boats more as surface torpedo vessels, vessels that could submerge and escape danger, but which would do most of their damage on the surface.
To overcome convoys, Dönitz will use group attacks. Large numbers of U-boats will silently stalk convoys by day, then swarm in at night for the kill. Dönitz calls this the wolf pack.
Like an antibody in the bloodstream destroying a virus, they will converge on a convoy. So what he needs are massive numbers of U-boats to accomplish that.
But Hitler doesn't wait for the boats to be built. On September 1st, 1939, Hitler invades Poland. Two days later, England declares war on Germany. The German Navy has only 57 U-boats. Dönitz plans a daring mission. He will send Günther Prien in U-47 into the home port of the British fleet. Six weeks into the war, Prien sinks the British battleship Royal Oak in its own harbor. It is a stunning victory. In Germany, Prien becomes a legend.
And the first tactical approach of German U-boats was attacking not in a submerged stage, but on surface.
It takes a lot of nerve to attack on the surface, but Dönitz hammers home his message. The way to win is to be daring.
He's going to be the kind of leader who will constantly push his people to be as aggressive as possible, on the edge of being caught or being sunk, always on the brink of perhaps recklessness. But he believes that only that will bring the victory in the end.
Well, you always have to take risk. That is clear. But it was a thin line. I had to be aware that I was responsible for my crew. On the other hand, My task was to sink ships.
The U-boat men call this the happy time. A desperate Winston Churchill turns to America. The U.S. Navy begins escorting British convoys carrying vital supplies. 6 months before Pearl Harbor, America is fighting an undeclared war against the U-boats. 2 days after the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor, Hitler declares war on the U.S. without consulting his Navy.
When Germany declared war on the United States, it was at this exact time a surprise for the naval staff. And the Navy was unprepared to send a U-boat force to the American East Coast.
Dönitz has only 5 U-boats available, but he wants to attack as quickly as possible before the Americans have a chance to organize convoys. But weeks become months, and still there are no convoys.
The United States Navy and the United States generally was unprepared for their onslaught.
A small number of German U-boats came to the east coast of the United States and sunk almost 400 ships. And that was the most massive military defeat the U.S. Navy has ever suffered.
As the sinkings mount, the British press the U.S. to protect its coastal shipping with convoys. But Navy Commander Admiral Ernest King refuses.
We had to make a choice of whether we used our resources to protect troop ships or cargo ships. This is the key. And Admiral King said, we're going to protect the troop ships. We will not lose one troop ship.
Even as U-boats are sinking hundreds of merchant ships, the Navy escorts over 150,000 American troops across the Atlantic. Not one is lost. By May, 5 months after Operation Drumbeat began, King finally has enough escort ships to begin coastal convoys.
And when they did, the sinkings by U-boats practically dropped to nothing.
The U-boats pull back into the Atlantic. Drumbeat is the U-boat's greatest victory of the entire war, but in the end, it accomplishes little. Never again will large groups of U-boats attack the U.S. But until the last day of the war, single boats continue to come right up to our doorstep. Lone wolves on the prowl. "757 German U-boats were sent to the bottom during World War II, the vast majority in waters far too deep to dive. In theory, at 230 feet, this New Jersey wreck is also too deep. Scuba technology is an invitation to trouble. And early on, trouble strikes.
We had a fatality. And I can't say it really was unexpected, because we've had fatalities deep diving before on other deep wrecks like the U-boat.
While down at the wreck, one of the divers, Steve Feldman, becomes unconscious and is swept away.
That man's body was not recovered for 6 months. And when it was subsequently recovered, by that time there was no way that they can ascertain exactly what killed him.
It certainly had an impact on everyone diving the wreck. And some of the guys who were on the trip that day never went back to that wreck, and there were even some that never went back to diving.
We all took a step backwards and said, hey, we're diving deeper than the U.S. Navy says is safe. We're at a point where oxygen becomes poisonous to the human body.
Breathing air at extreme depths can cause confusion, called narcosis, as well as seizures. There is an alternative called trimix, a blend of nitrogen, helium, and less oxygen than air. But trimix is untested in recreational diving.
The way we had looked at it in the past was that all it did was give you a clearer head, in that it reduced the amount of nitrogen narcosis you'd suffer at depth. But another thing it did was it lowered the percentage of oxygen in the gas you were breathing.
For safety reasons, the divers experiment with trimix. But they quickly discover safety is not its only benefit.
On air, you've almost got a tunnel vision. Certainly your peripheral vision is not very good. When you go down on mix, the wreck is almost alive, and your peripheral vision is excellent.
Better vision and longer dives make a difference. Searching the crew's quarters, John Chatterton discovers what appears to be an ordinary table knife. But on closer look, it seems he may have found exactly what they have been looking for.
I was running my thumb over it, and I could feel some sort of writing on it.
There was a name inscribed into the handle, and the name was Horenberg.
At last, the divers have learned the identity of a crewman. Someone on the mystery U-boat was named Horenberg. To learn more about Horenberg, John and Richie travel to Germany. They take their evidence to the U-boat archive in Altenbruck, run by U-boat veteran Horst Bredau.
Mr. Bredau.
Hello.
I'm John Chatterton.
Hello.
Todd.
Yeah.
We're the divers who...
We already had contact?
No, I don't believe so.
No. We found a U-boat off the coast of New Jersey.
We must look for it. We must have a look for it. We go first upstairs to look for the boats, yeah?
Bredau's archive is the most complete source of information in the world concerning Germany's U-boats and the men who sailed them.
There's a history of all 1,171 boats. I will not say that the history is complete, but almost complete.
We have some objects that we'd like to share with you.
The first piece of evidence here, this is a schematic diagram, and here, of course, it identifies it as a type 9C, Deschemag Bremen.
Do you have an idea what boat it could be?
Yes. Richie, the knife?
Sure.
One of the things that we'd found off the wreck was this knife.
You see on the alphabetical list of the killed men.
Bredau's records include a file on each boat, as well as a list of all the men who died in U-boats.
Horenberg.
Remarkably, Bredau finds there was only one man named Horenberg in the entire U-boat service. His first name was Martin.
Look, Horenberg, Funkmeister.
These are alphabetically listing of all
killed men. Yeah,
and there's only one Horenberg.
Only one Horenberg.
Is the spelling the same on the knife?
Yeah, it's the same. It's just the same.
It turns out that Martin Horenberg served on several U-boats. The boat he died on was U-869. But according to Bredau, 869 cannot be the mystery wreck.
Horenberg was a crew member of 869, and this is a boat sheet of U-869. And here you see, it was lost at the 28th of February 1945 in the middle.
The record shows that U-869 was sunk off North Africa, near the entrance to the Mediterranean Sea.
The records request that is off of Gibraltar, right?
Yeah,
or North Africa.
Cannot be at the shore or at the coast of New Jersey.
It seemed pretty conclusive that this submarine with the U-869 is sunk off Gibraltar. So how did Horenberg's knife get on this submarine?
What seemed to be the most promising of leads has been no help at all.
Forget the Horenberg knife. It's a dead end. Start over. Go back to the wreck. Find something else.
On Columbus Day weekend, 1992, the divers get a grim reminder of how unforgiving the process can be. A pair of experienced divers, Chris Rouse and his son, Chris Jr., are about to search the galley
plan was that the father would stay outside and Chrissy Jr. would swim in to the wreck.
Inside the wreck, something goes terribly wrong.
The son had gotten past the galley, struck something, and it fell on him. And he was in a cloud of silt he couldn't see and he couldn't move.
He remains trapped for nearly 30 minutes. Then his father goes in looking for him.
He managed to find the boy, extricated the kid, and they both exited the submarine.
But by now they are running out of air, and they cannot locate their spare tanks.
I think at this point they were both panicking, they were both extremely low on air, and they made a decision. They just surfaced from 230 feet.
In their panic, the father and son come up without decompressing. Their bodies are still saturated with inert gas. No longer under pressure, this gas begins bubbling out of their blood.
The son could not use his legs, and we literally had to drag him up the ladder.
The father died at the back of the boat, but the last thing he did was tell us to take his son on board first.
Called the Coast Guard. They flew a helicopter out. We cut our anchor lines and started heading back in towards shore to meet the helicopter.
The son lived on the boat. He lived for a couple of hours in the helicopter, and he died in the recompression chamber in the hospital.
The tragedy brings another dive season to a close. Over the winter, the team will regroup. Now, in the spring of 1997, John Chatterton comes up with a daring plan to get into the electric motor room where there may be boxes of spare parts that can identify the U-boat. John will remove all his tanks of gas except one. Pushing this single tank in front of him, he will squeeze his body through the narrow space above the oil tank. Once past the obstruction, he'll put his tank back on and proceed into the E-motor room. To Richie, it seems foolish.
This is a very dangerous wreck. So far, 3 men have lost their lives. It's one thing if you're just going on a sightseeing dive. It's another thing if you're going to dive down to 230 feet and penetrate into this broken ship. It takes a lot. It really takes a lot. It takes a lot of nerve, and it also takes a lot of experience.
Richie, if it looks like I'm having trouble, you give me as much time as you think you can safely give me to let me work it out myself. Anything that's 3 taps, 3 tugs, or 3 punches means trouble. And we're out of there.
Got it. Cool? Yep.
Let's do it.
Hang on.
If John's plan works, he will soon enter a place unseen and untouched since the day the U-boat sank. With Richie's help, John secures his decompression gases and removes his single tank. With only 20 minutes of gas, John swims through the hatch into the diesel room. Richie follows. John squeezes over the collapsed oil tank. Once past the oil tank, he's on his own. He plans to be back in 10 minutes. While waiting for John, Richie searches the diesel room for artifacts. It's been 10 minutes. Richie can see John's light faintly in the distance. He squeezes in for a closer look. Something isn't right. John's blue tank is visible, but he's not moving closer. Richie isn't sure what's happening, but there's nothing he can do to help. He has to start back. The divers on deck know John is running late, but they don't know why. Finally, John appears.
How you doing, John?
Yeah.
I've done better.
Tried to pass you the camera back.
Right. Which I figured you were done filming at that point.
I got in there, I got my tank back on, and I pulled a big piece of wreckage from the starboard diesel motor. A piece of manifold or something. It wasn't a pipe.
Accidentally?
Well, yeah, I didn't do it on purpose.
No, because when you went in, you kicked a piece off. It's going to be on the video, and it hit me. And that's why
a big long piece of heavy steel. I tried to get out from underneath it, and then it like swung down around and landed in my lap. And I wasn't so heavy I couldn't lift it up, but I couldn't get it off of me.
So what did you do for 20 minutes on the other side of the engine? I'm not being wise.
I spent the whole dive trying to get the steel off of me.
The next morning, he'll try again. With John past the obstruction, Richie hands him the camera. Now holding the camera, John swims through the door to the rear of the diesels and, for the first time, enters the electric motor room. On the right, controls for the electric motor. A fuse panel. Spare parts boxes. If John can break them loose without causing debris to collapse, one of these may finally identify the wreck. Back at the obstruction, Richie has been waiting nearly 20 minutes. The memory of yesterday's near disaster fresh in his mind. At last, John reappears with a box. He hands it to Richie. They send it up on a lift bag.
The bag pick it up, Jack? Bag's up. All right. It went right according to plan. John went in. I stayed on top of the obstruction. It seemed like forever. And all of a sudden, he came back. I see his light flickering in the distance. He just hands me this big green bag. And it's so heavy that I had to kind of like lump myself out of the wreck.
I got the one box out, handed it to Richie.
Yeah.
I went in for the second box. I couldn't break it free. Then I went to go out.
Did the bag come up?
Yeah. Well, we got one box out. There's a bunch more down there. I wanted to get as many shots at this as I can, but we'll take a look and see what we got.
Tag 117.
117.
That's not a U-boat number, though.
No.
Got a handle on the bottom corner.
Oh, whoa, wait a minute, right here. What
does it say?
U-869. All right! That's right. Interestingly enough, I think it took us longer to identify this wreck than it did to actually fight the war. So, absolutely, positively, this is the U-869. We've got the schematic diagram showing that it's a Type 9C 40.
Knife.
We've got the Horenberg knife, which places Martin Horenberg on this ship. We've got the tag here that says U-869, which was, historically speaking, the ship that Horenberg was on, but the U-869 is listed as being sunk off Africa. And this rules it out. It's definitely, beyond any shadow of a doubt, the 869. The page of history that has the 869 sunk off the coast of Gibraltar has got to be rewritten.
After 6 years and 3 deaths, the divers have finally identified the mystery wreck, U-869. But now, a new mystery emerges. Why was U-869, Martin Horenberg's boat, here instead of Africa? The final entry in U-869's war diary has the boat leaving for her first patrol on the 23rd of November, 1944. Just 2.5 years since the U-boat's triumph in Operation Drumbeat. Now, Drumbeat and the happy times were little more than distant memories from a far different war. The story begins on the 23rd of November, 1944. After 11 months of training, U-869 is ready to go. Her captain is 26-year-old Helmut Neuerberg. This is his first command. December 8th, 1944. U-869 leaves Norway on her first patrol. She sails for the Atlantic. 3 weeks later, U-Boat Command sends 869 her assignment: patrol the approaches to New York Harbor. U-869 is required to signal back and acknowledge her orders. But after several days, U-Boat Command has heard nothing. In fact, U-869 has answered, but Command has not heard her. The problem may be weather, or perhaps trouble with 869's radio. Whatever the reason, both 869 and U-Boat Command are trying to communicate and not hearing each other. But Ultra Codebreakers are hearing both of them. They now know U-869 is heading for New York. Meanwhile, U-Boat Command has grown concerned that U-869 may be low on fuel. They change her orders to someplace closer, Gibraltar.
U-Boat Headquarters wrongly assumed that she had used up a great deal of fuel. So they said, okay, she'll never be able to get to America with the fuel she has and get back.
U-Boat Command is now expecting 869 to arrive off Gibraltar by February 1st. But she never acknowledges her new orders. The Codebreakers wonder if perhaps U-869 missed the signal and is continuing to her original assignment off New York. Throughout February, the Allied Codebreakers remain confused. Is U-869 patrolling off Gibraltar or New York? Wherever U-869 went, by March 5th, the Codebreakers assume she is now probably homebound. But in all probability, U-869 never receives her new orders. She does not go to Gibraltar, but continues on to New York and disappears. Until half a century later, the divers uncover her story. Three months after identifying the wreck, John and Richie return to Germany. Again, they visit Horst Bredau's U-boat archive, this time to correct the official record of U-869.
When I came here to see you last, we had the Horenberg knife.
That is the problem.
At great difficulty, we've been able to get inside the wreck and recover an object that hopefully would have the U-boat's number. Now, as you can see, it's deteriorating terribly.
But on the face here
was two tags.
One tag was mounted there with that number on it, and Richie's cleaned up the other tag.
And as you can see, sir, it says U-869. This came from New Jersey coast. We have photographic evidence of the recovery.
This is original, yeah?
Yes, sir.
That shows real that it must have been U-869. Yeah? This is a beweis, a proof, a real proof. Now I believe you are right.
Fantastic.
I believe you are right.
Well, thank you. It took us 6 years, but...
6 years for one boat.
Yes, sir.
I took 50 years for 1,171 boats. Do you understand my problem?
Well, yes, sir. You have a better average than I do.
Yeah, but you should be my cooperator.
Well, thank you very much.
It's real true. Yeah. Thank you.
She's come home.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.
Sir.
Thank you for these words.
Thank you.
Thank you. Coming home. Yeah.
Half a century after she vanished without a trace, the final resting place of U-869 is now a matter of record. But questions about U-869 linger. Why she missed the message redirecting her to Gibraltar, and what caused her to sink, will always remain mysteries. Radio man Martin Horenberg had been in U-boats since the war began. It was practically a miracle he was still alive when 869 sailed. Little is known about the other crewmen, but 3 families have been located. Willy Rochprock was a machinist on U-869. His brother Johann was put to work at the Deschemag shipyard when he was 14. It's possible Johann helped build the boat his brother died in. Helmut Neuerberg, captain of U-869, left behind a 3-year-old son, Jürgen. Today, Jürgen is a doctor in Hamburg. Before his father left, he wrote Jürgen a farewell letter.
Soon, Papi must go with his U-boat in the sea. And we all hope that we will see us again in peaceful times. That's the last I see of my father.
Otto is picked for the U-boats when he is barely 17. He never returns. The family is told only that Otto was lost off Gibraltar. That is what Barbara still believes.
They were declared missing, but my dad needed to know more. So he wrote them, and this is basically the letter coming back saying that the U-boat U-869 was running low with fuel, and it was declared missing the 20th of February 45. And then it says, I had hoped that I would have had better, news for you about this. So I guess my dad always hoped, he wanted to know,
Me and my partners were diving, and one day we went out and we accidentally stumbled on this U-boat. We positively identified the U-boat, and I came here because I wanted to tell you that I found your brother's boat. And I'm positively.
I'm sorry.
That's right. The explosion which sank this U-boat was most likely self-inflicted. The torpedo failed and came back in a circle, and they sank.
Out of the 57 men assigned to U-869, one was saved by a twist of fate. Just before the boat left, Herbert Gashevsky was hospitalized with pneumonia and missed her departure.
I think of the ones I was close to. Radioman, Hornburg, Leo Platt. They were all close to me. Somehow I was saved. I don't know why. It was fate, destiny. I don't know.
Like U-869, the scars of the Second World War are still there, hidden beneath the surface, yet closer than we realize.